Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Judges chapters 6 through 12 in our continuing study of the Old Testament historical books. We start off in Judges chapter 6, verse 1. This is after Deborah and Barak and the deliverance from the king of Hatzor. Then the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of Midian. Now, Midian's way down to the south of Canaan. And so for 7 years, the Midianites they're not moving into Canaan, they're just coming up and taking whatever's not nailed down. And now, chapter 6, verse 11, then the angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, as his son Gideon was beating out wheat in the winepress. Now, you have to catch what's happening here, because you don't beat out wheat in a wine press. When you take wheat and you're going to thresh it, what you do is you want a wide open space with a good breeze, some wind, and what you do is you grind the grain, and in grinding it, it separates the outer kernel from the outer husk from the inner kernel, and then you take it and you throw it up into the air, and the wind catches the outer husk, which is the part you don't want to try to eat. It's just like garbage, and it blows that away. That's the chaff, and the inner kernel of wheat is a little heavier, so it just falls right back down. And then you gather it up, and now you have your grain that you're going to use to bake bread. Well, he's doing this in a wine press. Now, a wine press is just the polar opposite. A wine press is enclosed. It's like a little tiny place, sort of all enclosed, where you throw grapes into, and you step on them and you squish them to turn it to liquid, and then that's going to turn to the juice, and you'll ferment the juice, and it will end up as wine. Why would you beat out wheat in a wine press? Well, we're told in order to save it from the Midianites. So here Gideon is doing something that's supposed to be done outdoors, but instead he's doing it under cover of a wine press so that the bad old Midians won't come in and steal his grain. It's, he's afraid that his grain's going to be stolen. And so the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, O valiant warrior." And I have to chuckle because, judging from what he's doing, he doesn't look very valiant. He doesn't look like a warrior, but God calls him that because God is going to make him, in spite of his fearfulness, is going to make Gideon into a valiant warrior. It's sort of neat where God tells you what you're going to be. I don't look like that, but you're going to be, and then God's going to ultimately make him into that person that God has called him to be. Well, Gideon hears the the charge, and he's told by the angel of the Lord, "Here's what God has planned for you." And Gideon isn't quite so sure, so he asks for a sign. In fact, he's going to ask, before we're done, for three different signs. The first sign: "Show me a sign," and fire springs from the rock and consumes the offering that Gideon has brought to this angel of the Lord. That's a pretty good sign. um, Gideon says, "I'd like a sign." Well, what was that? But I'd like another sign. So he makes a second request. Let the dew be on the fleece. Takes a piece of fleece, and he's going to set it out on the ground, and then let the evening and the morning come. And when you're in the hills of Israel, there's dew that comes, with the passing of the night. So he says, "Let the dew be on the fleece while the ground remains dry." Okay, well, and it happens. Of course, that's going to take a whole night and a day for it to take place, but it takes place. And then he makes a third request. He takes, "I'd like another sign." Where, three strikes here. And he says, "Let the fleece be dry while the dew is on the ground." And it comes to pass. And so we've had three different signs, and they're all given to Gideon so that, yes, you can know this is a order from the Lord. The Lord is leading you to be his man who's going to lead the people of Israel. And so chapter 6, verse 22, when Gideon saw that he was the angel of the Lord, he said, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face, And God said to him, peace to you, do not fear, you shall not die. Seeing an angel of the Lord, let me just say, I've never seen the angel of the Lord, but Gideon does. Verse 24, then Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and named it, the Lord is peace. I want you to catch this. Peace be to you, the Lord said. And so he names the altar, the Lord is peace. And to this day, it is still in Ophrah of the Abiezerites. Now, I don't know that that altar is still there today, but it was at the time that Judges is being written. Remember, the writing of the book of Judges is going to take place quite a bit of time after the events that take place. Verse 25, now on the same night, the Lord said to him, take your father's bull and a second bull 7 years old. Bulls were expensive. And pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father. Really? His father had an altar to Baal? It tells me where the spiritual life of Israel had come to, where people would have altars to this pagan god, a god of the Canaanites. And so notice, pull down the altar of Baal, which belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah that is beside it, some sort of idol thing, again, for pagan idol worship. The Israelites were always doing this. They were supposed to be following God, but instead they were sort of, can I say it? Maybe they were just hedging their bets. It's not that they said, we're not going to worship God anymore, but they had added to the pantheon. They had become polytheists, I suspect. Verse 26, and build an altar to the Lord your God on the top of this stronghold in an orderly manner, and take a second bull and offer a burnt offering with the wood of the Asherah, which you shall cut down. And so Gideon's going to do this. He breaks down this pagan altar. Remember, that's his father's pagan altar. That's like close to home. But he's going to break it down in obedience to God and builds an altar to the Lord. Verse 27, then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord had spoken to him. Now notice, and because he was too afraid of his father's household and the men of the city to do it by day, he did it by night under the cover of darkness. It reminds me a little bit. Now, we're not told in John chapter 3 when Nicodemus comes to Jesus by night. We're not told specifically he came because he was afraid to come by day. It could be in the case of Nicodemus that Jesus was so busy in the daytime that the one time he could get a free appointment, was just at night. I don't know that. But here, in Gideon's case, he does it at night because he is afraid. He doesn't want to face the retribution, and there will be retribution that comes as a result of this. So, verse 29, they said to one another, this is the people of the city, of the town, they said to one another, who did this thing? And when they searched about and inquired, they said, maybe one of those 10 men told, or maybe somebody had spotted him, Gideon, the son of Joash, did this thing. Then the men of the city said to Joash, bring out your son that he may die. They're ready to kill him for having desecrated a pagan altar. Instead, they should be applauding him, but that's how society had gone. It had gone that far away from the Lord. Notice, for he has torn down the altar of Baal, and indeed he has cut down the Asherah, which was beside it. He is mutilating pagan altars. Shame on him, they say. You see what they're calling? They're calling for people to be okay with pagan worship. But they're not okay with the worship that's totally unto God when God commanded these other things to be torn down. They're thinking there are many ways to God. And let me just say, Jesus comes along and says, no, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And Gideon is showing this same single-mindedness, not on his own, because God told him to. He's just obeying the voice of the Lord. Verse 31, but Joash, now notice how Gideon doesn't come back, but instead it's his father, Joash, said to all those who stood against him, will you contend for Baal? And I want you to catch this because it's going to be the subject of a name. Will you contend for Baal, or will you deliver him? It's like, do you really need to protect Baal? Can't he protect himself? Whoever will plead for him shall be put to death by morning. If he is a god, let him contend for himself. Let him contend for himself. Let him do his own fighting, because someone has torn down his altar. Therefore, on that day, he, that is father, Joash, named him Jerubbaal. And Jerubbaal, remember that word contend? That's the word Jerub, and then Baal, contender. That is to say, let Baal contend against him because he has torn down his altar. So he gets the nickname, and we're going to use this nickname sometime. I'm still going to call him Gideon, but Jerubbaal, Baal contender, fighter against Baal. Verse 33, then all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the sons of the east assembled themselves, and they crossed over and camped in the valley of Jezreel. They had been raiding in the past. Now I'm not sure that they were necessarily saying we're here to stay, but we're certainly here to raid and grab stuff and just take what we want. And notice where they go, the valley of Jezreel, this big wide open valley, which today, and I suspect back then too, today it's actually the breadbasket of Israel. It's the most fertile area in this little valley. I shouldn't say little, because it's not that little. It's big and it's wide and it's farmland, and there's more food grown in that valley than all of the rest of the land of Israel put together. That was the case back then. It is the case even now. So they come and camp where the food is, and they're there to just take what they want. Here's a close-up of that valley. You can see some cities there, the ancient city of Megiddo, and then we've already talked about Mount Tabor at the northeast end of that valley. The valley sort of runs from the northwest to the southeast, and yet there's a leg of it that goes up to where Mount Tabor is. And we'll see, and it's called the Valley of Jezreel because there's actually a town of Jezreel at the east end of the valley. And then a portion of that actually continues to the east, and you can see the road down to Bethshan. We're going to talk about more of that. We'll see Bethshan come to light in a later class when we get to 1 Samuel. Well, we read in chapter 7, verse 1, then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, remember that's his nickname, and now here's his regular name, and all the people who were with him rose early and camped beside the spring of Harod, and the camp of Midian was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh. So you look at where Moreh is. They're south of that somewhere, and you're about to have a battle that takes place. And of course, it's these invaders against whoever will rise up and stand with Gideon. Now, he's basically been a nobody up to this point. Even the people of his own village were ready to take him out. And so he has gathered now 32,000 men. That's a lot. And he is instructed by the Lord. The Lord says, that's too many people. And so Gideon says, okay, whoever is afraid, actually God gives the instruction, Gideon's just passing it on. Whoever is afraid and trembling, let him depart. I can't help but wonder if Gideon thought to himself, does this mean I can go? But no, God is calling him to lead. And so 22,000 leave. Just do the math. 32,000 there, 22,000 leave, you're down to just 10,000. And so there's 10,000, and God says, that's still too many. Take them down to the river to drink, and as they drink, whoever puts his mouth right up to the water and drinks from the stream, send them home. And keep only the ones that reach down into the river with their hand and bring it up to their face to drink. Now, he doesn't give the reasoning behind that. I suspect maybe this is the idea that people that put their hand, they're maybe a little bit more aware of what's going on, but the passage doesn't say so. But that's the instruction, and most of them get sent home. These are the ones that said they were not afraid, but they sent home, and this leaves Gideon with 300. And God says, I'm going to deliver you with the 300 men. I'm going to win with the 300. It was up in the air as to who was going to win when you had 32,000. But now we've gone to a tiny fraction of that. I'm going to deliver with 300. Okay. Judges chapter 7, verse 9. Now the same night it came about that the Lord sent to him, arise, go down against the camp. This is the camp of the Midianites / Amalekites. For I have given it into your hands. Now, notice verse 10. I have to laugh at that. But if you are afraid to go down, and remember, Gideon has already had a bit of a fear problem. If you're afraid to go down, go with Putah, your servant, down to the camp. We haven't even read about Putah. He's been sort of in the background. And you will hear what they say, and afterward your hands will be strengthened, that you may go down against the camp. So, did you catch this? He went down with Putah. If you're afraid, go down with Putah. He was afraid. He went down with Putah, his servant, down to the outpost of the army that was in the camp, and he overhears a conversation, which tells him, and what happens is one guy is talking to another a Midianite or Amalekite, and he's talking about a dream he had. And the dream was sort of unsettling, and Gideon takes it as a dream that was showing that Gideon himself would be victorious. And so he is affirmed. So later that night, chapter 7, verse 16, he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put trumpets and empty pitchers into the hands of all of them, with torches inside the pitchers. So notice they have trumpets, they have pitchers, and they have inside the pitcher a torch. So you've got in one hand a trumpet, in the other hand a pitcher and torch. Notice what you don't have in either hand, there's no weapons. You don't have any weapon, which is okay, because I don't know that the Israelites had much in the way of weapons. They didn't have that high degree of technology. I suppose they could take a farm implement and fashion a weapon out of it. They could, maybe take a shovel and they could go hit somebody over the head with a shovel or something like that. But they didn't have any regular weapons, so he doesn't give them weapons. They're going to get trumpets, pitchers, and torches. That will suffice. Verse 17, he said to them, look at me and do likewise. He sort of acts this out. And behold, when I come to the outskirts of the camp, do as I do. When I and all who are with me blow the trumpet, then you shall also blow the trumpets all around the camp and say for the Lord and for Gideon. So they're basically noisemakers and light givers. Chapter 7, verse 22, here, notice they come up to this area, and they blew the 300 trumpets. This is in the area of the hill of Moreh. And they set this, and the Lord set the sword of one against another, even throughout the whole army. So they wake everybody up, and in the darkness, people in the camp that are being verbally and audibly attacked. The followers of Gideon don't have any actual weapons, so they can't do much in the way of attacking. But they make a big sound, and they're flashing torches. And the Lord set the sword of one against the other, even throughout the whole army. The army, this invading group, starts fighting among themselves, and the army fled. And notice, and they, sort of win and lose. In other words, they throw themselves into disarray, and the army fled as far as Beth Shetan toward Zererah, as far as the edge of Abel Meholah. Notice that that's on the south end of our map. So they're actually headed back home in a hurry. They're running, and they're running to get out of Canaan, and they're running down to this area of Abel Meholah, where there is a ford where they can get across the river. So here they are heading out. Verse 23, the men of Israel were summoned from Naphtali and Asher and all Manasseh, and they pursued Midian. Now that the enemy is on the run, you've got Gideon and his 300, and now we're going to have all those people that have been sent home from various tribes. An all call is put out. Verse 24, Gideon sent messengers throughout all the hill country of Ephraim, saying, come down against Midian and take the waters before them as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. So all the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they took the waters as far as Beth-barah and the Jordan. Then Gideon came, and the 300 men who were with him, they're still there. They came to the Jordan and crossed over, weary, yet pursuing. And he said to the men of Sukkot, now they've crossed the Jordan, and they're chasing down the Amalekites and the Midianites. Please give loaves of bread to the people who are following me. Now that's 300, but maybe remember that all call went out, so it might be a bit more than that. People are gathering for the pursuit. For they are weary, and I am pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, the kings of Midian. So these kings are on the run. He's after them. And he says this to the people of the city of Sukkot. And the leaders of Sukkot said, are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hands, that we should give bread to your army? We're not taking sides because we don't know if you're going to win. They're ambivalent to the needs of Israel. And notice, they're unwilling to take sides on the side of God or on the side of the enemies of God. And so Gideon hears this, and they're declining assistance, and he threatens them. He says, I'm going, because of your unwillingness to take sides, I'm going to treat you like an enemy. I'm going to thrash your bodies with thorns and briars. I'm not sure if you're going to take that literally, or maybe. And he has a similar reaction to the neighboring city of Penuel, that's right on the Jabbok River, flowing in, but still on the east side of the Jordan. And to them, he says, I'm going to tear down this tower. I'm going to punish you in both cases. And he will eventually do that. But now we have chapter 8, verse 22. This is after the battle, and it's been victorious. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, rule over us, both you and your son, also your son's son, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. Gideon, be our king. Rule over us. But Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. God is your king. You don't need any other king. And the story ends there, or so we wish that it would. But that's not the end of the Gideon story. He goes on in verse 24, yet Gideon said to them, I would request of you that each of you give me an earring from his spoil. For they had gold earrings because they were Ishmaelites, and that's the Midianites are Ishmaelites, and I guess Ishmaelites maybe have this habit pattern of having a gold earring. And they collected the earrings, probably with the ears still in them. And this had been what they had gotten from conquering the Midianites. And so Gideon took this, he made it into an ephod. Now, the ephod, see this, what this image is wearing? Yeah, it looks a little bit like an apron almost. That's an ephod. It's an outer garment that goes over your garments. And he made this ephod, placed it in his city, Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot with it there, so that it became a snare to Gideon and his household. He takes this apparel, which is supposed to be worn, it was usually worn by the high priest. I guess it could be worn in other religious instances. And he places it up as a trophy, and after a while, people begin to worship the trophy. That's bizarre. And it's idolatry. And idolaters will continue in their idolatry. By the way, there's an application for us. You say, oh, I've never bowed down to some sort of pagan idol. No, but greed is a form of idolatry. We're told that in the New Testament. And we live in a nation that's all about possessions and greed. And let me just say, that's a tough thing, where that can be a temptation to Christians to engage in that form of idolatry even today. So the ephod becomes a problem. Now, we go from here to Gideon's son. Remember, they had said, we want to make you and your son. And Gideon said, no, you're not going to do that. Well, after Gideon's death, we have now Abimelech, and his name is interesting because Ab is the word for father. You could go Ab or Abba. Abi is my father, and then the word Melech is just the Hebrew word for king. So my father, the king, is his name. Did Gideon give him this name? Did he rename himself by this name? I don't know. I'm not sure how he got it. But Abimelech comes along, and he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, that's Gideon's sons, 70 men on one stone. He wants to be king, and he wants to make sure that nobody else can, no one of his kin, no other sons of Gideon can take his place. And so he murders, notice 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself, and all the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar which was in Shechem. And so here we have this upstart guy who makes himself king, at least over this one city and this one, not sure if it's an entire tribe, but at least one city, and he's going to seek to add to his little kingship, his little domain. And so they make him king. And now Jotham, the one who escaped, he comes up and he calls out from one of the nearby mountains. Shechem is ringed on each side by two mountains, Ebal and Mount Gerizim, the two mountains where the Israelites had first come into the land back in the days of Joshua and had stood there and ratified the covenant with God, where God was supposed to be their king. Well, he calls out this parable, and in his parable, the trees of the forest decide they want a king. And so they go to the olive tree and they say, "Will you be our king?" And the olive tree says, "Oh, I'm too busy making olives, and that's a great thing. I've got my own calling. I'm not going to, I don't want to be a king over the trees." And so next they go to the fig tree, and the fig tree says, my job is bringing forth figs. I've got a great thing that I do, and I don't want to give that up to be your king." And they go next to the vines and say, "Will you be our king?" And the vine says, I'm in the business of making grapes, and that's a great calling to have. No, I don't want to be your king. And then the trees go to the bramble, that is the weeds. And they say, "Will you be our king?" And the weeds say, "Sure, glad to be king." And of course, the idea of the parable, the idea of the story is quite evident that Abimelech wasn't good for much else except to be a blight upon God's people. And so that's where they have gotten their king. Verse 22, now Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years. Then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. Now, when it talks about an evil spirit, that's not necessarily moral evil. The Hebrew word there, ra'ah, the word for evil, can refer to just something like a spirit of catastrophe, a spirit of trouble. But evil spirit works because that's actually the basic meaning of it. It can be natural evil or supernatural evil or moral evil. But it's between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, so that the violence done to and here's why God did this, verse 24. So the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. They had participated in the deed, and so now God is going to he's going to use them to punish each other. And so Abimelech attacks and burns the city of Shechem. The people run into a tower, and that gives them no relief, and he burns it down, and everybody dies. And now he goes to the city of Thebez, and he's going to do the same thing. He attacks the city, and they run into a tower. And this time, he's saying, "Okay, everybody, we're going to burn that tower down too. Bring up trees and branches and wood to light it on fire and smoke it out." And there's this woman. She's not even named. We have no idea who she is. She has a millstone. Now, a millstone is a rock, probably smooth in appearance, that's used to grind the grain. The fact that she's carrying it tells me that maybe this isn't a big giant millstone. You've got millstones that are so heavy, I would be hard pressed to pick them up. This might be a little hand millstone. I'm not sure how big it is. It's still got to be sort of heavy because you're going to use it as to grind grain. And she's got it with her up in the tower, and she takes it and she throws it, and it hits Abimelech in the head. And he sees this as a mortal wound, and he's got blood coming out of his head. Oh my goodness, I'm dying, and I don't want it to be said that a woman killed me. So he says to his armor bearer, "Quick, kill me, so that no one will say he was killed by a woman. I don't want that dishonor on my future name." And here we are, 3,000 years later, and let me say it for the record: he was killed by a woman. So we're still saying the same thing. Catch this. We already had in the story of Deborah and Jael. Remember Sisera, the general of the armies of Hatzor, was killed with a tent peg through the head. And here again we have Abimelech now, who had turned into the enemy of God's people. He was supposed to be part of God's people, but instead he had become their enemy, and he's killed with a millstone that crushes his head. I want to go back now and look just a minute at the outline of Judges so far. We start off with a prologue in two parts, and part of that talked about the cycles of discipline of a redeemer, and then turning back to sin, and God sending judgment, and things like that. Then we had, I didn't even mention it because it was so brief, the Othniel narrative is only a few verses of an invader that comes from Mesopotamia, and then Othniel raises up and delivers Israel, but there's no details given. So it's just mentioned very, very briefly. Next, we looked at the Ehud narrative. Remember, there was a social outcast. Oppressors from the east side of the Jordan, from Ammon, had come, and he delivers them in spite of the fact that he's bound in his right hand. We saw the Deborah and Barak narrative, and there a woman slays the enemy, little Jael, with her tent peg, slays the enemy with a blow to the head. We've just seen the Gideon story, chapters 6 through 8, and then we had the Abimelech narrative, where again, did you catch the parallelism? Again, a woman slays the enemy of God's people with a blow to the head. Next, we're going to see, let's just finish up the book of Judges. Next, we'll see the story of Jephthah. We're going to see that in just a minute, where he is also a social outcast, not because he's left-handed, but because of his parentage. And again, there's going to be oppressors from the east of the Jordan. So, that's we had Moab before, Moab with the Ehud story. This time it will be Ammon. I think I misspoke a minute ago. After that, we're going to see Samson. We'll see that in a future class, the Samson story. And then in a future class after that, we're going to see a final epilogue in two parts. That's going to be very extensive, so we'll spend a whole class period just looking at that. But I want you to see the symmetry of the book of Judges, and how this woman slaying an enemy with a blow to the head, you have that twice. And that reminds us of something way back in the book of Genesis. We already noted that, so I'm not going to go over that. The woman slaying the enemy with a blow to the head. Judges chapter 10 and verse 6, then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord, served the Baals and the Asheroth, the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the sons of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistines. Thus they forsook the Lord and did not serve them. So we're back to the sinful practices. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he sold them into the hands. And notice now we've got two hands, the Philistines, and into the hands of the sons of Ammon. Now Jephthah, the Gileadite. A Gileadite is somebody who's a descendant of Gilead. There's both a person but also a place known as Gilead. We'll look at that on a map in just a minute. He was a valiant warrior, but he was the son of a harlot, and Gilead was the father of Jephthah. So Gilead gave birth to Jephthah, and notice Gilead's wife bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." So you have this divided family with Jephthah and his mother of not like a good background. And then Gilead goes on to have other sons, and they drive, and Jephthah becomes now an outcast, a social outcast, because of his parentage. And so here he goes out, and so Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, that's somewhere outside the land, and worthless fellows. The Hebrew says sons of Belial, but that's just a figure of speech. Worthless fellows, bikers, ruffians, however you want to describe it, that works. And they gathered themselves about Jephthah, and they went out with him. And so here he is living a wild and crazy life, and sort of becoming something of a leader among these outcasts. And now the story develops, and just going to give you some brief overlays here, where the people of Gilead are having problems, and so they bargain with Jephthah, will you come back and be our leader? Because the problems they're having involve the king of Ammon. He is, remember that you have both Moab and Ammon, and they're the descendants of the sons of Lot. And the Ammonites are coming up and threatening the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan. They're saying, this used to be our territory. Now, Jephthah corresponds with the Ammonites. He says, well, it used to be like a few hundred years ago, but it's, you didn't really say anything about it between then and now. So it's sort of late for you to be arguing about that now. It would be, I guess, a little bit like if I'm trying to think of and I probably won't go politically correct, but imagine, for example, if you have Native Americans today saying, you white people all ought to go home. You came here, you weren't invited, and by the way, that's true. Sometimes I've joked and I've said, if the Native Americans had better immigration laws, maybe none of us would be here. But be that as it may, that's sort of past the fact. That's ancient history. And so Jephthah corresponds with them and says, you shouldn't be arguing about this now. That was hundreds of years ago. Now they don't take that. The negotiations don't work, and so they end up going to war. And Jephthah is victorious. And during his warfare, he bargains with God, and he promises God that when he gets back home, whatever comes first out of my house, I will give to God. Now, I'm not sure what he was expecting, if he had thought that promise through, but he comes back home, and it turns out that his daughter is the first one out of the house to come and greet him. And I don't think Jephthah was expecting that. I don't know if there was an annoying dog that he had that would always come for. I don't know what he was thinking. But his daughter comes out, and he's going to follow through. However, she bargains. She says, tell you what, can I have a couple months just to get my affairs in order? And he does give it to her. And then she is taken. And now, when it talks about she's given to the Lord, it sounds like a human sacrifice where she is actually killed. Now, some folks have said, I can't believe that Jephthah would do something like that. After all, he's supposed to be one of the heroes. Maybe he just takes her and sort of dedicates her to a life of chastity, and she's not going to be able to get married. You say, well, if that was the case, why do you need 2 months ahead of time for that? So I suspect, I can't say this for sure, I suspect this was a human sacrifice. And you say, really? God's person is going to do that? Let me just say for the record, there are people in this book, in the book of Judges, that do things. They may be on God's side, but they don't always act correctly. In fact, we've seen quite a few of them, and we'll see more. We're not done yet, of people who act incorrectly. And so the book of Judges is not given for you to say, oh, let me follow their example. Indeed, just the opposite. It is given to show us that God is the only real hero in this book. And so Jephthah, yes, he has some faith. Yes, he does something that works out for God's people. But let me just say, don't do as Jephthah does. And next, he finds himself in a conflict with Ephraim, where they come and challenge him. They say, you should have called us before going to war, gotten our permission, and maybe we would have done some leading there. And again, the negotiations are going to break down. His bargaining. I'm not sure Jephthah was actually a good bargainer. He tried. So we read, the men of Ephraim were summoned, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, why did you cross over to fight against the sons of Ammon without calling us to go with you? They take it as an affront, a movement against their honor, and so they conclude, we will burn your house down on you. I mean, the lack of solidarity between the tribes and people of Israel is astounding. And so here they cross over, and notice where they've crossed to, and the way to do that, you have to go down to Adam and then up to Zaphon. So they crossed over and then moved up to Zaphon, where they make this charge. We're going to take it out not against the Ammonites, but against you. And Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead. Gilead is both his household, but also that gives rise to the place name. We're going to, from now on, refer to that area on the east side of the Jordan River, and especially north of the Jabbok River. We're going to call that the land of Gilead. And we'll see that both in the rest of the Kings and Chronicles, and we'll even see it when we get to places like the Song of Songs. We're going to have references to Gilead there. That's the land of Gilead. Well, Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought Ephraim, and the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, you are fugitives of Ephraim, O Gileadites. You guys are just like no good, and you ran away from us. And in the midst of Ephraim and in the midst of Manasseh, which, remember, Manasseh did have some territory over there. And so they counterattack, and not only do they counterattack, but they win against the invading tribe of Ephraim. And so the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan opposite Ephraim, and they come down, and the fords are down there at Adam. And it happened when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, the people of Ephraim, they've been defeated in battle, they're trying to escape back to their own hill country. When the fugitives of Ephraim said, let me cross over, the men of Gilead would say to you, are you an Ephraimite? If he said no, if he denies his tribal origins, then what we read here, and what they've done is they've bottled up the folks, from crossing the river. They would say to him, say now, shibboleth. You say, what on earth is a shibboleth? Well, that's just the word for a stream, like a flowing stream, which there's the stream. This is actually a conjunction of streams at this location where the Jabbok flows into the Jordan River. And notice how you say that, shibboleth, with a letter sheen, and we put an SH to get that sound, but the Hebrews have their own letter for that. But he said Sibboleth. Notice the sh sound. There were some folk that had gotten out of the habit of pronouncing that. And you actually have a tribal distinction where some tribes would take a regular Hebrew word and pronounce it one way, and others would pronounce it a different way. Think about somebody from Boston. Now, I'm not picking on anybody from Boston. I think they have a really neat accent. But they do have an accent. I've got a friend who he actually has a bit of a speech impediment, and it makes him sound like somebody from Boston. It's really great. I love to hear him talk because it's just a delightful accent. But in his case, it's part of a speech impediment. Here, it was just part of an accent, and they had gotten out of the habit of pronouncing that SH sound, so they called it Sibboleth instead of Shibboleth. But he said Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it correctly. And if they did that, notice, then they seized him and slew him at the fords of Jordan. Thus there fell at that time 42,000 of Ephraim. It's one tribe against the other. And we have entire tribes losing a whole lot of people as a result of this intertribal warfare. Now, back to Jephthah's daughter. Remember, I mentioned her a minute ago. I want to close with a couple of points here. She gives herself for her father's honor. I suppose she could have tried to run away. She doesn't do that. She does bargain, can I have 2 months to put my affairs in order? But she gives herself for her father's honor. Um, in a sense, can I say that perhaps this is part of the seed of the woman theme in the book of Judges, where her sacrifice is seen, at least by Jephthah, as an agreement to get rid of part of getting rid of the enemies of God's people. Now, I didn't place it there in the outline because I'm not sure it fits there, but I can't help but think there's echoes of that, where her life is given to advance, at least in Jephthah's mind, to advance the cause of the people of God. And she becomes, in a sense, in that way, again, in Jephthah's mind at least, a deliverer of the people by giving herself as a sacrifice. And this echoes from something in the New Testament, because Jesus also gives himself for the honor of the Father. He is also in fact, he's not just he's the ultimate seed of the woman. He fulfills all of that, and he becomes a deliverer of the people by giving himself as our sacrifice. You can trust in him as your Lord, as your Savior. And you don't have to worry about how you pronounce things. Come to him in faith and trust in the one that God has given.